friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, most podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling stuff halfway through or even towards the end. But because I'm hoping that you're asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff up front. As always, this show is brought to you by the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from more people every week how valuable they find the show and how helpful it is to them. And those supporters who have the means to help to fund the show, to keep it going and help me reach new audiences, are very much appreciated. I did mention last week that during the lockdown, finances were a bit of a struggle for me, and if it wasn't for the people who have been helping me keep the show going, I may not have been able to justify doing so. It's not quite so much on the bubble as it used to be, but it's not something I've brought up in a while, but I would really love to do this full time. I'd love to be able to produce more episodes and spend some more time on them and potentially even reach even more people to help them. So even though things are not desperately in a rough position for me anymore, you really can help this show to grow and help me to grow it with it. So it's very much a long-term plan. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, if you have the means and you can, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or go to the link in the show notes or from the website and have a look. You will have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people. And over and above that, there are real rewards from as little as $2 a month. There's the early release of the main weekly episode, as well as a weekly bonus episode and special edits of the main show, depending on the level at which you support. But other than the Patreon, there are other methods to support as well, such as the tip jar, the merchandise store, and others. But even bigger than financial support, actually just spreading the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just tell them. Just let them know. And if you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. My tag is @SleepyTimeTales on Instagram or Twitter. And of course, as I feel I need to do every week, because it's such a critical part of the identity of the show, and how people engage with it, I need to shout out the music. The song that I use is Un Desire by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that's released under various names that I recommend checking out. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning in emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. It was only fairly recently, actually, sort of in my mid-30s, that I discovered the tendency for droning voices, especially male ones, to just make me fall asleep even when didn't notice what was going on. I used to go to bed with podcasts to listen to because I was expecting to lie awake all night, and I'd find myself waking up having slept through everything I was trying to listen to. When I discovered that this happened, I started actually deliberately listening to podcasts specifically intending to sleep. And fairly recently, I discovered that there are others out there actually designed for the purpose of helping people to fall asleep. I tried one or two that worked very well for me, but when I recommended them to others, for various reasons, they didn't really resonate with some people. Sometimes it was the narrator's voice or something like that, or sometimes it was their topics or their stories, and they just found a resistance to it. So I thought to myself, I've got a boring, deep, drony male voice, so let me give it a try and do my part to see if I can help others. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It's something that I know not everybody likes, but the fact is that this intro kind of is the point. It serves two major purposes. Firstly, if you're new to the show and new to the idea of sleep podcasts, you may need a little bit of a case made for it. An explanation of why I think it might help you and how I think it's helpful to engage with it. And if you've been with the show for a little while, once you've been with the show for a little while, it serves a very different purpose. Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a space together, a sort of mental nest for you to curl up and fall asleep to. So for older listeners, what we're doing here is we're creating that space. Now is the time to start getting ready to sleep. Prepare yourself for the story. Listen to me droning on and telling you things that some people have heard 80 times by now. But I do it slightly differently every week for a reason, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to prepare that space. I'm trying to give you something familiar for you to have go running on in the background while you get yourself ready. For newer listeners, I think there's a couple of possible ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I need something, a sort of story or a series of events or something to keep my mind on, some specific point or train to stop my mind from spinning into stress and anxiety. I need to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for me. But some people might need something a little bit more primal. White noise machines and background noises are the sort of thing for people these days. And for some it might be the sound of rain or the sound of the ocean or some boring dude just droning on in the background. However you choose to engage with the show and whatever you get out of it, that's really up to you. This week we're returning once again to a story that I've started before, a few months ago, The Swampers by Hume Nisbet. The first chapter or two was a rather interesting story about a sort of fake psychic who met someone from his past that he wasn't overly excited to meet and who promised to give them an interesting new life. This episode we pick up from there. The visitor was a person of ill repute who was going to help establish a much more powerful practice for this psychic, sort of down on his heel psychic. And yeah, I don't want to spoil too much, but there is a little attempted suicide at the end. Spoiler alert, it doesn't pan out into anything, but for people who get there, it may be a little bit shocking. But don't be too shocked. The story continues quite excitingly after that. But however the story is, whether it's about romance or ships or psychics or criminals, what really matters is that you don't fall asleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and the sound of my voice, and allow sleep to come for you, to take you in its embrace while you're thinking about something else. Now, obviously, I'm hoping quite strongly that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's very important that you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night with us, this may not work for you. In fact, I go so far as to say it probably won't. I recommend giving it 2, maybe 3 nights to sort of get over the, I think, natural mental resistance that you may face, like a lot of people will. Because it's a strange thing. Listen to a podcast at night in the dark, listening to a person you don't know and you don't know if you can trust. So it may take you a little while to verify that you can trust me. Also, especially if it's your first night or second night, one episode may be too short for you. What I do with my sleep podcast as well is I queue up a few episodes. I keep a whole bunch downloaded and I just start on the latest one and I let them run all night. Because I sometimes wake up at 3 a.m. That's the new unfortunate insomnia habit that I've developed lately. And the podcast is still running, and I just, if my earbuds have fallen out, I put them in and fall back asleep. Sometimes I even wake up 30 minutes or 60 minutes or so before my alarm goes. I treat that the same as if I've woken up at 3 a.m. I just carry on listening again and I'll fall back asleep again. And I do have to tell you that 30 minutes is sometimes the most restful part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is just satisfying on a very deep level. But whatever time of the night you're listening to the show is, or however many episodes you're listening to, or anything like that, it is very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, and as I've already said, this may seem a little bit strange to you, so I think you should give it a chance. Give it a couple of nights and just see if you can get over that resistance. And if after 3 nights you're not sticking with it, that's fine. This isn't for you. That's okay. Best of luck finding something that does work for you. So that's the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark. And while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, better, well-rested, and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep. Even with me here in your ears, trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and supposed progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Tonight, we return to The Swampers by Hume Nisbet. Chapter 3. The New Establishment. If the professor had reason to be a proud man, 4 days afterwards, he could hardly be said to be a completely happy one. He was possessed of vanity and ignorance enough to have accepted any post, but the position wanted grappling with and getting accustomed to. These daily ablutions were decidedly irksome, and after being accustomed to limp linen, to be imprisoned in stiffly starched shirts and collars was a trial, to say nothing about the soft carpets and the flashy furniture, all on the higher system, which awed his silly soul. The habit of scratching was an ancient one, and not easy to set aside. Still, he did his best to live up to his new surroundings and forego that luxury. Jack Moulton, in his character of John Williams, had engaged the servants and young ladies to wait upon expected clients. The professor found them all on the spot when he arrived, with his brand new wardrobe to take possession. Attractive and exceedingly sharp-looking girls in sedate and well-fitting costumes, and a page boy to open the door, with a face like a knife newly ground and eyes like a snake. Not many page boys, even of the keenest colonial produce, could have had a chance with this remarkable boy, for activity, wide awakeness, and composure. He was a demon page who can anticipate an order before it was half thought out, far less expected. The cook and housemaid were not beautiful, but they were agile and wonderfully constructed. Quiet, freckle-faced women who performed their duties deftly and moved about the house like Malays or Chinese. There was also a man kept on the premises to split wood in the cellar and look after the horse and dog cart in the yard, for the professor was stinted in nothing by his liberal patron. This man likewise had been chosen for his strength of muscles rather than his good looks, and he was very modest, for he seldom went out to the street. His duties lay solely in the back kitchen, cellars, and yard. The sleeping partner and financier of the business took up his abode on the premises, and had his meals with the professor, and generous meals they were, both as regards viands and liquors. The professor, for the first time in his checkered career, had the delight of quaffing champagne and burgundy with his tucker, and like the hero he was, he went into these delights with heartfelt pleasure and thirsty energy when the daily duties were over. Each night after the hours of consultation, supper came on, and he never rose from that supper, but drank on until he found the soft carpet sufficient as a couch for the night. Jack Moulton had been correct in his estimate of the gullibility of the Sydney people when the bait is presented to them with a blaze and a glitter. In his small and mean way, the professor had been able to keep himself going, with the low fees asked for his priceless services. But he was astonished now at the crowds who waited in his anterooms and the golden offerings which poured in during the fashionable hours of consultation. As soon as the fashionables grasped the fact that such an establishment had opened in the locality, and columns of advertisements made them suppose that there must be money at the back of the concern, they at once patronized it. And because it looked genuine and like a success, the public made it so, with their generous fees. Psychometry became a theme of conversation from the Potts Point to Botany Bay, and the psychometrist a decided boom. Of course, this peculiarity of encouraging and bending down to apparent success is not altogether confined to Sydney. although in other places the public may not be quite so quickly got at by such shams, nor so candid in their contempt for failure or poverty. "Make hay while your sun shines," Jack would say as he roused up the professor from his hog-log repose each morning and superintended his bath and dressing. "Get as drunk as you like when business is over, but you must look capable to use the rake during the day." Yet although he was so strict with Mortikali, the sleeping partner, after he had braced up and set the fraudulent machine going, would prove his position in the firm by going off to his own bed and sleeping for the best part of the day. It was astonishing what a quantity of sleep he could do with. He said that he did not sleep well at nights, and that was why he took so much of it during the day. Certainly in the mornings he did look worn and wearied enough to justify his assertion that he could not sleep well at nights. "I'll have to put you under my magnetic treatment, my boy, if you don't get better. Let me give you a few passes now," remarked the professor, when he had picked himself up from the floor and cleared his muddled faculties somewhat with a shower bath. "Them wines do pour the electric force into a sensitive like me. I feel all of a tingle this morning. Just see how my arms and hands are shaking. It's the healing power of filling me to bursting point. That's what it is. My old mother, who was a rare medium, used to tell me I had the godlike gifts to make my fortune as a healer, and by George I begin to believe she was in the right." He was engaged, while gabbling on, in making hypnotic passes round the recumbent head of his stalwart friend, who had pitched himself wearily upon one of the couches in the private dining room. "So your mother was a medium, was she?" sleepily answered the drowsy Jack. "Aye, one of the right old school, and no gammon about her. She wouldn't give a seance for nothing, not she, like some of them blooming fools do now. Her familiar spirits only worked for the pounds, shillings, and pence." "Good old party. And what about your wife and family? Where have you left them, eh?" "Don't mention them," replied the psychometrist with a vicious emphasis. "I have cast them out of my heart forever, leastways they chucked me out, the unnatural mob. That woman, my wife, fell to religion. The Methodists took her in hand and spoiled a first-rate trance medium. She'd have nothing to do with me afterwards and said that my gifts came from the devil. And what do you think my eldest son had the impudence to tell me? I give it up. That I was as ignorant as an unweaned pig. There now, what do you think of that from a man's own son?" Jack Moulton, who had been gradually succumbing under his protege's passes, or from his own fatigue, rallied a little at this and burst into a hearty laugh, which, however, he qualified by saying, "It was cheek and no mistake." "What do you think, my boy? But that wasn't all, for he followed this nasty remark by taking me by the scruff of my neck and pitching me into the street, telling me never to darken the door or disgrace them again with my lousy presence. Ah, if they could see me now, though, wouldn't they feel ashamed?" "It's quite likely they would," murmured the patient, as he succumbed and fell asleep. Barney, the stable hand and woodchopper, was like his master during these hot mornings, and did a considerable amount of sleeping among the straw in the stable, after he had attended to the pony and split what wood was needed for the kitchen. However, as these were nearly all the duties yet asked of him, no one complained about his drowsy habits. The weather was too oppressively hot for anyone to work much, except the professor, until the night came, and his work was not overtaxing either to the mind or muscles. He knew the formula of the cards and how to prattle about the lines of life, girdle of Venus and mount of Mars, with the breaks and crosses in between. His customers were also fairly credulous and not overcritical either about the predictions or manners of the predictor. He was now well dressed, his hair and beard were tidily trimmed, and his surroundings were flashy, and those completed the illusion. Each victim came to him desirous of listening and with wishes to be gratified, and they gave him the key to those wishes quickly enough. Therefore he sent them away happy, for he predicted exactly what they wanted to come to pass. His fees had been raised to suit his new surroundings. 1 guinea for the future, revealed either by card or palm. 4 guineas of the stars were consulted and a chart drawn out. He generously threw in a little phrenology, palmistry, and card shuffling along with the astrology for the same fee. His massage and magnetic treatment was a 10 guinea per visit affair, and a course or series of visits were required before success could be promised. As we have said, the professor became an instant and pronounced success, for although the establishment had only been opened for 6 days, he had hardly time at this stage to bolt his lunch through the flux of customers, while the sovereigns and shillings rolled into his coffers at a perpetual stream. It was better than a gold mine while it lasted. A pity these booms are so soon over, murmured Jack Moulton regretfully to himself as he took charge of the money each night, allowing the professor just enough for his daily expenses. I might have settled down comfortably in this business and dropped the other, but it can't go on. Perhaps one cause of this rapid success was that this knavish and foolish fraud of a futurist had as firm a belief in the spirits, the cards, palmistry, and the stars as his customers had, or pretended to have. He had before now paid his half-sovereigns to get his own future divulged by other professors in their own craft, and they in return came to him, now that he was successful, to see how he did it, and learn a trick or two out of good faith. And it was his bona fide air of faith and credence which helped to impose on others. A man must be in earnest, even in roguery, to become a success. Cynics are never successful money-makers. The new branch, which had been added to the business, the selling of certain tips for the upcoming races and sports, caused the professor a good deal of uneasiness and feeble remonstrance before he would consent to take it up, for he knew nothing about horses, cricket adepts, or the other gambling transactions, and he said the spirits were not always to be depended on in such mundane matters. They are tricky and play larks at times, and then where will we be? Busted? But Jack was confident about the successes of this branch. He knew all the tricks of the turf and would not admit of failure. He would tell when the spirits were likely to give false information, he said, and put them on the right track. So plunge, my sage, philosopher and friend, for plunging is our game now. The professor yielded, as he generally had to do when the daring Jack commanded. The first race would be over in 8 more days, and this was Friday of their second week in possession, and that must either bust them up or else draw the whole colony swarming into their net. The psychometrist trembled, but accepted the position and braced up his courage by sundry glasses of brandy and soda, while the sporting victims came in and paid lavishly for the certain tips, promising the fate of the Welsher if he proved a false prophet. Each night also, while the wearied futurist drank himself into a blissful state of unconsciousness with the generous juices of old France, Jack sat smoking hard and concocting fresh advertisements for the newspapers in the name of Mortikali the Great. Florid and humorous compositions, regardless of expense, these were of Jack's, which filled whole columns and delighted both the readers and proprietors of the different papers. And the editors proved their gratitude by giving the professor and his establishment constant praise and appreciative interviews. "Won't all them advertisements swamp our profits, mate?" the professor would feebly ask. "Not a bit of it. Our arrangement is to pay at the end of the month, as we do with the furniture establishment, and we'll have lots of money by that time. How did you manage it?" "Easy enough. In these dull times, people are only too pleased to give credit. I paid our landlord a month in advance and got him down to the Marble Hall to speak about it, and my bank account, which I showed him. Free drinks at the same Marble Hall of Tattersall's and the Australian, with a little discreet bounce, fluency of gab and display of jewellery, drew the blinders over the eyes of the press. They can only see the road I lead them into now. Do you savvy, old sage and psychometrist, eh? You're a big man, Jack, and ought to die a millionaire." "I ought, and I hope to live one also." A short time afterwards, as soon as the professor had found his customary couch on the carpet, Jack Moulton, attired in his white wig and blue spectacles, took his usual prowl around the newspaper offices, handing in his copy and shouting drinks. afterwards visiting the fashionable places of resort and paying his money like a man, amongst both dudes and capitalists. Then on his way back, he dropped a letter into a post biller for Mr. Arthur Chester, solicitor. On his return, he put on an old suit and woke up with the strong-armed Barney, and went with him for an hour or two of real hard labor in the cellar. For when they came from these underground regions, they were covered with dirt, and sweating profusely, yet both appeared satisfied. "That job's ready at last, Barney, my boy, and tomorrow night we'll all have to lend a hand." "It'll be as clean a job as I was ever in, Captain. When you take a thing in hand, you does it neatly." Jack smiled at a compliment from his henchman, and after a drink of brandy and soda, they both went like brothers into the bathroom, and after a good wash, for the first time during these past 6 days, sought their beds before daylight. On Saturday afternoon, Jack paid an early visit to the bank next door, paying in a good number of sovereigns and enjoying a pleasant half-hour's chat with a genial manager in his private den. The letter which Mr. Chester received ran as follows. "Tell Rosa and her people that I've landed in Melbourne and will be home on Sunday night. I shall also be at your house very early on Sunday morning with the treasure I spoke about. Leave your backyard and stable doors open for me so that I needn't disturb the neighbors getting in, and be prepared for me. Jack." "We shall all be prepared for you, Mr. Jack," murmured Mr. Chester with a sinister smile as he read and destroyed this interesting epistle. Chapter 4. Treasure Trove. 1 o'clock Sunday morning, and 4 resolute men are assembled in the dining room discussing steaks underdone and strong tea. For they are different from the professor, who lies in a hoggish state of stupor beneath them. They have much to do tonight that will make or mar them, and they require no wines or spirits to brace their courage up to the sticking point for daring or robbery or cold-blooded murder. They are colonial-born and the grandsons of convicts, inured to the sport of hunting from their earliest years and astute as savages on the warpath. Besides, they would rather gain their livelihoods in this way with its deadly risks than live by any other means. They cannot help themselves. They are wild beasts, with a coating of craft and cunning, bred from convict fathers and mothers, and gifted with only the one ambition, to excel in this business. There is not one of them who has not been state school trained and educated as highly as the standards can make them. They can all spell fairly and can write with a flowing hand. They don't make any mistakes in grammar, they know their geography, and some have even advanced in Euclid. But they are one and all hunters and sons of sportsmen. They like the excitements of the chase, and they will have it, even at the risk of their necks. Their present sports are a pawnbroker's shop and a colonial bank that has not yet failed. Jack Moulton is the only one among them who has no convict antecedents. He had become a master criminal as Cromwell became a soldier, through the force of circumstances, but now he dominated them. They wanted fresh blood and a leader, for though they were wicked enough and false enough, yet the secretive and inventive genius seemed to be destroyed. New South Wales was always want to a leader, yet never to find one who does not swindle the country. There are no patriots among them. They cannot hit upon patriots, simply for the reason that patriots come plainly and simply costumed and without ostentation, whereas they want a flourish of trumpets, as the ancient Jews did when they looked towards a Messiah. Perhaps also it is that the warmth or some other degenerate quality in the atmosphere that may be the cause of this deplorable decadence. But although the children of the second and third generation are wonderfully sharp, false and crafty, they have not the quality to grasp greatness of soul, nor that grandeur of simplicity which stamps the hero. They can appreciate the smartness of a swindler after they are swindled, and indeed they seem to admire the sharpness, but they cannot comprehend an honest man. Jack Moulton was a big fellow amongst them. He could plan and execute grand coups, and he had, what they could not fully comprehend, a staunch interest in his friends. Therefore they appreciated his talents to plot out schemes and get them out of the scrapes, and they instinctively bent to the principle which they could not understand, his good faith. Each man of that small gang would have sold Jack Moulton if it had been made worth his while, Yet each man knew that he could trust Jack Moulton to a pennyweight. It takes a lot of personality to persuade state school-trained savages to trust in anyone. The women were there, the smart handmaids whom Jack had chosen. They were the keenest criminals in Sydney, who had managed to escape for 6 full days the supervision of the colonial detectives. The page boy was a young imp who had served him on former occasions and who could be trusted as a setter. The cook and housemaid had discarded their petticoats and now appeared daring young callous cornstalks and sun-freckled demons who would pause at nothing. "Girls," observed Jack when supper was finished, "you know your duty while we work. Cecil, my son, every 3 minutes when you see the policeman approach, give us the hint he passes and looks into the open pawn shop." "Girls," observed Jack when summer was finished, "you know your duty while we work. Cecil, my son, every 3 minutes when you see the policeman approach, give us the hint. He passes and looks into the open pawn shop every 3 minutes. 6 minutes will do our business there if all goes well. The bank is guarded by a watchman, a housekeeper, and a confidential clerk. A dog was also there an hour ago, but Barney has silenced him. I'll undertake to silence the watchman, the housekeeper, and the clerk. Do you require any more grub or liquor?" "No, boss, we've had enough. We are ready." "Come along then, get to your posts. Cecil and you girls, 3/4 of an hour all I need to do the whole business in. The biggest in my life." "What about the professor?" inquired Barney, looking down on that prostrate hero. "Oh, he is all safe. I dosed his last glass of burgundy," replied Jack. "Come on, boys, and brace yourselves up for work. The pawn shop first. They'll put crepe masks over their features by way of precaution. Not that they expected to be seen. Yet still it was best to be on the safe side." Silently, they followed one another downstairs and into the commodious cellars of the establishment. The professor still sleeping the sleep of unconscious infancy, while the girls and the page boy crept outside. It was with some pride that Barney showed them the excavations he had made on the one side, from the cellar to the bank, and on the other, from the cellar to the pawn shop. They had the game clear before them if they could escape the watchful gaze of the police on that one side and the inmates on the other. Jack and Barney were the mechanical engineers of the concern. They had bored the hole and in a few seconds made the trapdoor to admit them to the premises of the pawnbroker. Then they were all through and in the full glare of the gaslight and the open windows to whomever passed, for the pawnbroker had no shutters. Jack and Barney waited a second and then they rushed forward, pulling down and piling up boxes and packages between them and the windows. In 2 minutes exactly the barricades were raised in a natural fashion, that they could lie panting behind, while the policeman made his usual survey. The next portion of the work was easy as far as detection went, although requiring immense presence of mind and personal strength. 3 great safes were standing by the walls filled with valuables and money, but Jack Moulton had his plans arranged beforehand. Therefore, getting all the clothing and soft pledges he could from the shelves, he pitched them on the floor, and then with their crowbars and levers they overturned the safes, and rolling them one after another, shot them down into the excavated shaft, where they could break them open and examine them at their leisure. It took the 4 burglars 9 minutes to remove these iron safes. That would have taken expert workmen a couple of hours. Such is the effect of sport or excitement on the spirits and muscles of men. The other business was simple after this exploit, to dart to the till and rifle it between the visits of the police and take whatever else was of value, leaving the showcases untouched in the windows. In 15 minutes from the time they had entered the pawnbroker's premises, the deed was completed and the pledges were their property. Jack Moulton left Barney and the other 2 men to break open the safes in the cellars while he penetrated the bank. It was not difficult to enter, for he had undermined the place and silenced the watchdog. He also knew where the confidential clerk and housekeeper slept, and where he was likely to find the watchman. One of the young men who had acted like a servant went with him, and together they stole upon the watchman, who was fortunately nodding by his table in an anteroom. A chloroform-saturated handkerchief soon settled him, and then they proceeded upstairs. Fate had gone well with Jack Moulton up to now. The housekeeper was easily managed, for she was asleep when they entered her bedroom, so that she never knew what caused her to sink into a deeper and even more peaceful slumber. But with the confidential clerk, it was otherwise. A toothache had kept him awake that Sunday morning, so that as the crepe-masked burglars entered the room, he leapt from his bed and confronted them with a loud cry. Then it was all over for the confidential clerk, for without a pause, Jack rushed upon him and, pinning him up against the wall, gave him the garrote grip, one grasp first on the shoulder, and the elbow driven with sudden and savage force against the larynx, silencing the voice and breaking the apple. With a gurgling sound, the poor man sank to the ground, and all was quiet. Jack Moulton was a murderer. He looked at his victim for a second, with horror in his eyes. Then, with a heavy groan, he dragged his accomplice away and made towards the loot. It would be time enough to think of his crime afterwards. At present, his blood was fired up for the sport. The dying cry of the clerk had not reached the policeman outside, and all the streets were peaceful on this Sabbath morning. Only Jack Moulton knew that one life had been sacrificed on this raid, and he kept that secret to himself, so as not to disturb the unholy glee of his confederates over their winnings. It had been a rich loot, all in all, with the pawnbroker's pledges and the bank hoardings, and he may now retire and exist in love and comfort on his lion's share of the proceedings. He is a wealthy man now, with what he has made tonight and what he had before. But that poor confidential clerk's death has to be avenged. It does not take long to win a battle, kill a stag, or break into a bank. By 3 in the morning, the Confederates had divided their loot and made all their arrangements to part company. Jack Moulton has his share, all in coins, jewels, and ingots, in his dog cart ready to drive off, and the others are satisfied with theirs. A boat at the wharf waits to take them off to a ship ready to sail, and a couple of cabs already arranged for hang about a side street. They are taking a parting cup, and Jack stands among them silently, thinking of that dead clerk, whom the others knew nothing about yet. The clerk who will hang him if he is not careful. "Well, mates, you are satisfied, I hope," says Jack quietly. "Thoroughly, boss. You have carried out the contract like a man. We may now leave old Sydney for a spell, but won't there be a blooming racket on Monday morning?" "I expect there will be, but you'll be out of it, and I can cover my tracks." "Mates, I've been a good pal to you, have I not?" "The best going." "Then do me a favor. Take this drunken sot, the professor, with you, and land him somewhere, for it won't do to leave him here." "You're right, mate, he might split on us," said Barney. "We'll land him in America, where he's sure to prosper in that business of his." "That will do, Barney. Take him with you, and here, give him these 500 quids. We couldn't have done without him, and it's only right he should look after a chum. Particularly if he's dangerous, as this one happens to be. Here, boys, hoist the carcass along with the property." They raised the intoxicated and drugged psychometrist and dragged him off to the cabs at the corner along with the loot, while Jack watched them going with an abstracted air. Half an hour afterwards, the psychometric establishment was minus servants, attendants, and professor. Then Jack turned with a heavy sigh and led the pony with the laden dog cart into the street. He locked up the backyard gate, and no one checked his course as he went along. The policeman at the corner touched his hat to him when he passed by. He thought nothing of the eccentric movements of the white-haired partner of the fashionable fortune-teller, for he had become used to his ways. Often had that pony taken early morning exercise during the past week. As he drove along, he looked at the stars and tried to console himself with the reflection that no one could foretell what might happen in a campaign. Warriors go out to battle and kill for their country, and no one thinks of blaming them. A laugh had been taken that night, accidentally. On Monday morning there would be wild excitement and a big reward for the murderer. But he would be with his faithful and lovely Rosa then, with all his traces covered and an assured future before him. That surely was worth the candle he had burnt, the risks he had run. 4 o'clock, and he was at Mr. Chester's house, the bachelor's establishment which this astute lawyer kept. Jack Moulton knew very well that the housekeepers would have a holiday on this morning. Therefore he felt safe as he led his horse and trap inside the back gate. And when he had shut that, he knocked at the kitchen door softly. A moment, and then the door opened gently, and a voice asked, "Who is there?" "Jack with some baggage." "Bring it inside." Mr. Chester did not help the housebreaker with his burden, and the packages were lifted from the dog cart and carried indoors in the dark. Then, when the door was closed and fastened, Mr. Chester struck a light and looked at his visitor with a scrutinizing gaze. "What is this you have brought in these bags?" £50,000 in gold, replied Jack Moulton quietly. "Put them away for me and invest them." "All right, leave them there for the night." "Have you told Rosa I'll be home tonight?" "Yes, she expects you," replied the lawyer. "Good, I'll go now. Good morning." "Good morning." They parted with these words, and Jack led his pony and empty dog cart out of the gate, which the lawyer closed and barred after him. After which he drove away into the country at a furious pace. Chapter 5. Jack Moulton at home. They had a small tea party at Trumpet Tree Cottage on the Sunday night when Jack Moulton came back after his 2 years' absence. It is only right and proper for a man to apprise his wife and friends of his homecoming, whether he has been absent for a short or long period, particularly for a long period. Surprises are seldom pleasant either to the receiver or the one who gives them. Some men in Jack's position might have felt inclined to play the romantic and time-honored joke of entering the cottage suddenly and disguised in rags, just to see how darling Rosa and her parents would receive him. Jack could hardly do this, even if he had been disposed, since he had entrusted a considerable sum of money to Rosa's cousin before he went away. He was not disposed, however, to this sort of romance. He had always liked to pose as a rich man, and he liked also to be entertained and made much of by his friends, and he did not care how much he spent to gain this end. He loved his wife Rosa with all the reasonless intensity of his lawless nature, and to have doubted her so far as to have tested her truth was beyond his strength. She had said she loved him, and she had married him, which seemed proof sufficient for his vanity and his desires. She seemed delighted with his presence. Therefore, like a good husband, he took it for granted that she mourned his absence as good wives ought to do. The lamps were lighted and all the stars were out when he drove up to the front gate, not this time in the dog cart or with his white wig on, but in a cab with portmanteau and bag beside him, as if he had just come from a journey. Rosa was on the lookout for his arrival and ran eagerly from the veranda up the little walk to the gate. And here she flung herself into his arms, regardless of the grinning driver. "At last, you old darling, Jack." "At last, my fairy," replied her husband fondly, as he clasped her to his heart, and then they went indoors like true lovers. Rosa Moulton lived with her father and mother, or it would be more to correct say, since it was the money of Jack which had furnished and kept the home going, that the parents of Rosa lived with her. Her father had been a draper's bookkeeper before his daughter's marriage enabled him to throw up his occupation and retire upon the bounty of his flash son-in-law. This yet promptly done, for few cornstalks of the second generation care for working if they can get out of it. The Sydney climate is too enervating for much exertion, and the example of other husbands and fathers is too infectious to be long resisted. It is almost a universal rule now for the women to keep their men, and this is what most of these young colonials enter the holy state of matrimony for. The sire of Rosa was a genial, old and gentlemanly loafer for all that, and looked quite a respectable father as he sat in his armchair with the Sunday papers before him, his spectacles on his well-shaped nose and his silver-grey beard floating over his black vest. Mrs. Mulligan, his good lady, also bore out the appearance of a highly respectable matron as she sat beside the teapots and dishes, and altogether there was a decided air of home-like comfort about the lamp-lighted and well-furnished front parlour. Rosa was like the generality of her Sydney sisters, creamy complexioned with features almost classic in their regularity, strongly defined eyebrows and clear grey-blue eyes, with a plentiful supply of golden brown hair. She appeared small alongside her tall husband, yet she was above the average height of women and possessed a figure which for symmetry would have won the approval of the most exacting lover of the beautiful. Clearly the road to Jack's heart had been by the eye. They were a magnificent couple, and most people would have agreed that they were well matched. Jack with his strong dark face, square jaw and powerful frame, and Rosa with the seductive wiles and graces of a Helen. A disciple of Lavater might have found characteristics in both of these attractive faces to make him pause and ponder, as indeed he could have done in the other faces gathered around this festive board. Mr. and Mrs. Mulligan and Mr. Arthur Chester. But Cupid's glamour had blinded Jack, and what the others thought did not interfere with the warmth of their welcome to his arrival. The viands were lavish and well enough cooked, for most colonial women are adepts at homework. A couple of fowls with a ham and a prime joint of beef, flanked by roasted kearmaries, pumpkins mashed, and mounds of tempting tea cakes. Mr. Chester carved the fowls and ham, while the gentlemanly father cut the joint, and the mother poured out the tea, thus leaving Jack and Rosa with nothing to do except eat, drink, and look tenderly at each other. After tea was cleared away, at Jack's request, and Rosa and her cousin went to the piano and sang duets. Jack was fond of singing, though he could not sing himself, and Rosa had a clear, if somewhat metallic voice. She did not play, but Arthur Chester managed to accompany her and himself with a creditable vamp. Therefore, that part of the evening passed away very well. Then, when the whiskey decanter had been put upon the table and pipes were lighted, Jack began to tell his adventures of the past 2 years in the South Seas, and in this he proved himself a perfect master of fiction. Othello could have not done better, nor could Desdemona have listened with more rapt admiration and devotion than did Rosa as she sat on a low stool at his feet, her pretty tea gown falling in graceful folds about her, and her white arms bare to the elbows as the white sleeves drooped back. She rested these white and shapely arms on his knee, with her chin on her ring-covered hands, and those steadfast, clear blue-grey orbs fixed on his black eyes. Occasionally, however, she shifted her head slightly to glance with a kind of wonder at her attentive parents, or the quietly observant cousin. When she glanced at Arthur Chester and caught his eye, a slight flush tinted her creamy cheeks, and a tiny curl lifted her upper lip, revealing her white teeth and the redness of her full and moist lower lip. At these times only a gleam shot between the eyes of the two cousins, and then she turned her face once more with touching admiration towards the fertile-minded Jack. "I shall call around tomorrow evening for office hours and have a business talk with you, Moulton," said the lawyer, as he rose to his feet about 9 o'clock and prepared to take his departure. Do, answered Jack, also getting up. I intend to spend tomorrow at home and take it easy. I expect you'll be interested in the newspapers after being so long without them. Yes, I'll put in my time that way. You get the papers, I suppose, Mr. Mulligan? Yes, the Herald. I'll bring it up to your bedroom, replied the father-in-law. Rosa now proposed, as the night was warm, that they should see her cousin a little way towards his house. And as Mr. and Mrs. Mulligan were not inclined for the exercise, the three young people went out together. Rosa in the centre, with her hand through the arms next to her of each companion. In this fashion they went, linked together, into the night. Jack Moulton did not venture out of doors the next day, but Rosa, like a dutiful wife, brought him all the newspapers, the Town and Country, the Australasian, the Guillotine, and the dailies, to amuse himself with while she went about her household duties. Rosa liked to work in the kitchen with her mother and the servant, and had some favourite dishes to cook for Jack. Therefore he had to yield, and to do without more than a flying visit now and then from her, and a fugitive kiss, while he helped his father-in-law to loaf. The papers interested both men very greatly, for they were filled with the account of the great robberies which had been discovered on Sunday morning. Jack groaned inwardly as he read about the dead body of the confidential clerk being discovered. It was the first man's taking off which would be laid to his charge, and it made him feel uncomfortable, even though he tried to persuade himself that it was an accident. He had, however, great command over his features and feelings, and read the account quite calmly out to his wife and his father-in-law. Mr. Mulligan listened with interest, such as sensation raises in one, while Rosa, with a slight shiver of horror, hurriedly left the room for a moment, and then quickly returned. I expect there will be a big reward offered for the murderer, Jack, she said, fixing her clear blue-grey eyes on him. I expect so, little woman, replied Jack, with his glance still on the paper. Mr. Chester came after the lamps were lit, with the evening papers in his pocket. Have you seen the account of that big robbery and murder in George Street? He asked as he entered. Yes, replied Jack and Rosa together. Any more about it? The bank people have offered a reward of £500 for any information that may lead to a capture of the principals. As he spoke, he turned for a moment from Jack and cast a straight glance at Rosa, who looked down at the tablecloth and began to smooth it out. The police headquarters will receive the information and pay the reward, continued Mr. Chester. And then they all sat down to the usual high or dinner tea and began talking about other topics. After tea, Rosa said to her husband, I'm going out tonight, dear, to see a girlfriend in town. Mrs. Gray, you remember? And as Arthur has come to discuss business with you, I'll leave you alone for an hour or so. I won't be late, darling. Will you stay until I come back, Arthur? No, Rosa, I must be going soon, as I've a host of letters to get through tonight. He did not look at her this time, but she looked at him, a lingering look, in which blended a little contempt with some other emotion. Very well, I shall say good night. Now I'll leave you gentlemen alone to discuss business. Depend on me, dear Jack, I will not be late. She rose and left them with these words. Jack smiling fondly on her, she quitted the room. Then the two men sat down squarely to business, for Mr. and Mrs. Mulligan had gone early to their own apartments. When the business was gone through, Mr. Chester rose to leave. This is a very serious affair, this murder as well as robbery, isn't it, Moulton? Yes, very serious, and to be regretted, replied Jack. I can depend on your promise made to me, I suppose? Yes. No one shall ever say that Jack Moulton did not keep his promise. Good. And good night. After Chester departed, and until Rosa returned, Jack experienced a singular fit of dejection. Everything had gone right with his schemes. The horse and dog cart were over the cliffs, and his wig and spectacles and clothes were destroyed. He had left no traces that he could think about. His companions were clear away, for they'd arranged that beforehand, and yet the spirit of that confidential clerk seemed to be haunting him. He went to the sideboard and took as many whiskies as he dared to take, to brace up his courage and give him some of his lost pluck. He dare not take much drink, in case he might talk and get restless. He looked at his revolver and found that in good order, and then, before he could get quite too desperate with himself, darling Rosa came back, beautiful and tender. His wife took him straight away to bed, and she said she would shut up the place after she had seen him comfortable. She even went the length of going to the kitchen and brewing him a glass of whiskey hot as a nightcap. But although he felt he had taken enough, he did not like to refuse the dear girl. Therefore, he made some excuse to get her out of the room long enough to enable him to throw the stuff out of the open window and pretend that he had taken it. She laid her creamy, soft cheek against his for a moment, when she brought him what he wanted, and gently kissing him on the lips said, "Now, dearest, let me go and see that all is safe in the house, and then I'll come to bed." She left him with these loving words and stole gently down the stairs in her stockings, taking the lamp with her and leaving him in darkness. For a moment he lay thinking fondly about her and planning out the future. Then his acute and trained ears heard sounds outside, which banished sleep and woke up his faculties. He stole softly to the open window and peered out to see forms of men surrounding the house. He knew what that meant to him. Down the stairs he crept like a phantom with his revolver in his hand. Whispering voices in the dining parlour lured him on, and he turned in that direction and listened by the open door. "You must be patient yet a little while, for he is a strong man. But in a few minutes he must be asleep, for I've given him a strong dose of chloral." This was the voice of his darling Rosa, and another replied, "I'll wait, missus. Hadn't you better go and stay beside him till he drops over?" "Yes, I'll go and see him now." He did not wait for the lovely traitress to come out of the parlour. The revulsion was too great for his wild, untrained, and passionate nature. Without a pause, he planted the revolver to his brow and pulled the trigger. And that is enough for tonight. If you're interested in see where this story goes, you can find it on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.